Good evening all, and welcome. Haunted woods are certainly creepy, as we're about to find out. I've also got a humble request. If anyone here knows about Twitch, or watches it, and like puzzles and crafts and stuff, one of my friends actually started a little Twitch channel? Is it a channel? A Twitch account. And, and if you're into that kind of stuff, I'm going to just leave a link to their Twitch in the description. Only if you're into that kind of stuff though. No obligation. Thank you everyone. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Yesterday, I was walking back home after hanging out with some friends. I was sober and in my right mind. I've never been afraid to walk alone in the dark. I'm quite tall and intimidating looking from a distance, and I always bring a pocket knife when I know I'll be walking in the dark. Anyway, I was walking past some woods on the way back to my house when I heard my mother's voice calling for me. "Gabriel, help!" This was coming from inside the woods. I immediately recognized her voice and turned to look into the woods. She kept calling my name over and over. I couldn't see anything. It was far too dark to see through the trees. "Mum?" I called back, heading towards the woods. She sounded like she was in trouble and scared. I assumed that she'd gone for a run like she did every night, and somehow got lost in the woods. Then I realized it couldn't be her. She'd texted me only 10 minutes before asking me to come home soon to watch my little sister, so she could go on a run. I stopped dead in my tracks and called my mum. The voice in the woods is still calling my name and getting more frantic by the second. She picked up and I immediately asked her if she was in the woods. She said no. She was back home with my little sister. I swear to God, as soon as she said that, her voice stopped calling my name from inside the woods. I was overcome with a wave of dread and fear that I'd never felt before. Something in the woods was trying to lure me in using my mother's voice, and it knew my full name, not just my nickname, which made things even scarier because the only person who calls me Gabriel is my mum. I immediately turned and ran faster than I ever had run before back home. When I got back, my legs felt like jelly and my lungs burned. I opened the door and there she was, my mother, sitting on the couch with my sister. I would think this was some sort of prank, but my mum isn't one for pranks, and even if she was, there's no way she could have gotten home before me without me seeing her. My only question is, what was in those woods? There's a locally famous haunted road in my town called Upsom Road. However, it is more commonly known as Green Lady Cemetery Road. You can look it up online. There have been tons of reports of incidents on this road. It's a hotspot. If you grew up in my town, you've been down Green Lady Cemetery Road. I could go on for days about telling you the stories I've heard from others about this location, but I would rather tell you about the two experiences I've had on this road. The second one made me swear to never go down it, day or night, again. The road had never been paved. They've left it terribly bumpy and as a dirt road to stop people from going down it. Most times of the year, the town puts up barriers so no one drives through it. Not because it's a walking path, because simply they don't want people going down there. At one end of the road, there is an old piece of property that the town bought, that you'll often see a police car sitting in. If you decide to pull onto the road, you'll be pulled over immediately and be told you're trespassing, even though it is in fact public property. They can't legally stop you from driving down there, but most people don't know that and will turn you around. The road starts off as just a wooded dirt road. It's only about a mile long and you can drastically see a change of scenery in a very short amount of time. As you pass the wooded area, you come up to a section of road where on your right is a small swamp, and on your left is more forest. However, nothing seems to be able to live out there. When you hit this section of road, you're officially in the hotspot. If you park your car and look around, you'll notice that trees don't seem to grow there. They are all dead and rotten. You will not hear birds chirping. It's dead silent. Going just slightly further up the road, just past the swamp, is where things get very eerie. On the left-hand side of the road is a very, very old cemetery where the Green Lady stays. The headstones are all dated from the 17 to 1800s. There's also a small foundation next to the cemetery where a house used to stand. It's been reported time and time again that people have witnessed a green mist floating around the cemetery. People have seen this green mist form into the shape of a woman in a dress, walk back and forth around the cemetery. And there are a few theories as to who this woman is, but I'm not completely sure anyone knows exactly who she was. Anyway, it's a bit of a rite of passage here in town where every kid who gets their license drives down the road at night, just one time to be able to say they've done it. Here are my 2 stories about it. When I purchased my first car, the first thing my friend Jordan and I did was take a drive down that road. I'd picked him up at his house at around 10:30 at night, and we drove over there. It had been extremely hot that day, and towards the night, it had rained a bit and cooled down a bunch. That combined with the swamp being on the road, it was so foggy you couldn't see more than 3 feet in front of you. It was absolutely the worst time to be driving down there, to be honest. We'd both been a bit nervous and the fog wasn't helping us at all. We had been creeping down the road slowly, so we couldn't really see where we were going. We had gotten about 200 feet from the cemetery when a teenager comes running out of the fog and runs right past our car. We didn't recognize him, but this kid was bolting down the road. He was dressed in a grey Nike t-shirt and black baseball shorts. He looked like he was about our age, so we were even more confused that we didn't recognize him. Jordan and I both agreed that the kid looked like he was running away from something, so we decided to turn around to offer him a ride. Mind you, there is a ton of bears and other large carnivores here, so we thought perhaps something might be chasing him. I quickly turned the car around and started driving back in the direction the kid was running. We drove for a little bit but didn't see him. The fog had started to clear up a bit, so we were able to see a decent distance in front of us, but we still couldn't see him. He wasn't on the road. He wasn't in the forest. He was simply gone. I rolled down my window and started to yell, "Hey man, are you okay? Do you need a ride?" hoping that the kid would pop out from behind a tree or something. But nothing. The kid was simply gone. Maybe he was some kid who decided to walk down that road at night and got spooked. Maybe he saw headlights and thought we were cops and hid from us. We still don't know to this day. We had asked around in school the next day if anyone knew of anyone who went for a walk down that road at night, but we never heard anything. If there was a kid out there that late and he ran up into the forest, that's even scarier than the thought of the ghost teen running past our car. I'll never forget the look on that kid's face as he ran past our car. He looked like he was scared, panicking, and I really wish I were able to find out who he was. Now for my second and final experience. Jordan, the same friend from the previous story, had gotten his first car, so obviously the first thing we had to do was go down the road. The weird thing about this drive is that once again as we got closer to the cemetery, a thick layer of fog had started to pour out of the trees from the swamp, although the weather had been the same all day, with no rain and no temperature drops, nothing. Luckily this fog wasn't as thick as before, and we could see in front of us. We'd gotten up to the cemetery, and Jordan parked the car. We sat around for a little while and looked at the cemetery. The forest just observed everything. After 5 or so minutes, Jordan looks at me and says, "Dude, how weird would it be if I looked in the rearview mirror and there was someone in the back seat. Who says that? I mean, honestly, dude, look where we are, it's not even a joke. That's seriously not funny, bro, I told him. He looked up in the mirror and screamed. I spun around, looked in the back seat, and there was nothing there. He started laughing. I got you, bro. Again, you're not funny, Jordan. He didn't want to keep wasting the gas, so he turned off the car and shut off the headlights. Now this idiot has us sitting on a famously haunted road in the middle of the night, in the pitch darkness, surrounded by forest. We're parked right in front of the old building foundation of the cemetery. It's just ahead of us. We sat there for a few minutes smoking cigarettes and talking about nonsense. I'm kind of staring off into the trees at this point. Honestly, a bit bored. When out of nowhere, Jordan says, "Hey, there's someone in the forest." I shrug it off, assuming he's messing with me, when I see a subtle light in the forest behind the cemetery. It looked like a flashlight with batteries that were as close to dead as they could be. The light vanished after a few seconds, and we both sat there with our eyes glued to the patch of forest. Roughly 30 seconds later, a tall, ovular light started to appear in the same spot that the light came from. Jordan says to me, "Okay, dude, I'm done, let's go." And I'm telling him, "No, hang on, wait." His hands are on the key. He's getting ready to start up the truck and drive away. The light was very faded, a little hard to see, but when the forest behind it is pitch black, it stood out. It slowly started to move along the rock wall at the back side of the cemetery, and Jordan started up the truck. He was so ready to leave. As his headlights kicked on, we saw a green mist floating around the road. Jordan yells out, "Screw this," and slams the truck in reverse and backs up until he felt far enough away to turn around. We had always heard reports of the green mist. Supposedly, if you wait long enough, you'll see the green lady walk around in the mist. But we were too scared to wait for that to happen. I never thought the green mist was real until that night. And to this day, I swear I will never drive down that road ever again. I highly recommend you look it up. It's probably one of Connecticut's most famous paranormal hotspots. I was about 19. My best friend had become friends with a guy called Chris. Chris lived with his mom, Crystal, in a small house located in a village in Cumberland. Crystal was really cool and would let us hang out there. The house was built in the 50s or 60s. All the doors in the house were glass. The living room had 2 entrances with double doors, and there was a conservatory on the back of the house, which the other doors led to. Basically, at night, no matter where you stood, you could see everywhere on the ground floor, either directly or reflected in the conservatory. There was a small garden with a fence, and then the woods. The people in the village itself were weird. We would have a nervous laugh about it being like the Children of the Corn, Village of the Damned, or the League of Gentlemen. The kids in the street would stop and stare as we walked by. Shopkeepers would stop what they were doing and smile, but never say a word the whole time. People walking down the street would either be mumbling or laughing to themselves. On a few occasions, they would walk until just past us, scream and then run off down the street, as we all stood looking bewildered at each other. And I would say, "I hope you know we're all gonna pass here." I'm not exaggerating when I say that is how everyone was on the street. They behaved in that way without fail. It was creepy, absurd, and a little bit hilarious. One day, me and my friend Bud went to the local pub, where everyone stopped and turned to look at us. The pub was full of men in polo shirts. Anyway, you just need to understand the nature, the surrealism of this place, where everything was quite strange. It wasn't long into my first visit before we got Crystal talking about some of the weird things that go on, not just in the house but the whole area. She had collected newspaper clippings from the local paper to back up some of her stories. Here are some events that I remember she told me. If you've ever heard of the Bonnie Bridge UFO sightings, on one of these occasions, a UFO was spotted near the village. The woods were well known in the area for the amount of bodies that turned up. It was rumored that a coven of witches practiced black magic in the woods. People said they had seen robed groups of people in the woods and white horses in nearby fields. People had been found with their lives taken where the trails cut off. Chris and Crystal told me one night the entire street was out in the backyard. There was chanting coming from the woods. They said it was so loud it must have been at least 50 people. Men, women, deep voices, high voices. Crystal said the creepiest part was as soon as the chanting stopped, it would instantly start in another part of the forest, like they were jumping from one part to another, or a group of hundreds of people throughout the forest were performing some perfectly coordinated chanting in the dark. To a bunch of teenage adventurers, this place was crazy. Crystal also mentioned that strange objects had been left on the steps in the backyard, feathers and twigs tied with twine, and a few times robed figures standing just beyond the fence. Well, that was all mind-blowing. And then she started to tell us about the house. Both Crystal and Chris refused to use the second-floor bathroom to go in to the spare bedroom. At some point, Crystal had noticed scrabbling sounds coming from the loft. She assumed it was either a rat or squirrel that had gotten in. Also that all the spoons in the house had started to go missing. Each time she returned to the house, another spoon was gone. Finally, there were no spoons left, and she tore the house apart trying to find just one with no luck. She searched everywhere except the spare bedroom. She was pumping herself, getting ready to go in, when she heard a bump from the loft. Oh no, she thought. There's someone living in the loft. She called the police. Chris had come home from a friend's house at this point, and they both listened to the bumping and scrabbling as they waited for the police. Even the police heard it when they arrived. They pulled down the hatch, went in, and found nothing, except all the spoons laid in a row in front of a burned-out candle. The policeman, straight-faced, suggested she get an exorcist. They never told me why they didn't go into the other rooms, but Crystal believed she was cursed and that her ex-husband had something to do with it. Despite the honesty in their face and the clippings and all the things I'd experienced in my life, at that point I was skeptical. It's hard to let go of that, even when we did start experiencing things. Often a group of us would be hanging out, watching a movie or something when this would happen. The first time we all sat there, gradually it dawned on me I could hear something. A perfectly natural sound. Someone was in the kitchen, clearing dishes away. I could see reflected in the conservatory window, someone moving back and forward in the kitchen. I looked left and right, doing a head count, and felt my blood drain. I turned to my buddy and said quietly, "Who the hell's in the kitchen?" Still looking at the TV, he said, "Oh, it's, quick head count. I don't know." The rest of the group had begun to catch on. They saw it too. We armed ourselves with anything we could find, golf clubs, chairs, guitars. Half of us took the hallway entrance and the other conservatory entrance. As soon as someone could see directly into the kitchen, the noise straight up stopped. The clattering right up until the very last moment. None of us slept that night. However, it happened again and again. We purposefully took people who had never been there and knew nothing about it and waited for them to notice, and it was always the same without fail. Sometimes when we all decided to crash for the night, the only place left was the spare room. I went up, opened the door, and some big guy had beat me to it, right there all wrapped up in the quilt. I went back downstairs with a sigh. My buddy asked me what was up and I explained. He's adamant no one is in there, pointing out where everyone is sleeping. I agree, but I'm also adamant someone is there. We both go up, open the door, and the quilt is flat and hanging off the bed. The second time it happens, I was with my girlfriend. She never set foot in that room again, but it wasn't just us that saw that one either. One night, one of my pals was taking his sweet time in the toilet. I decided to use the one upstairs. I walked up the stairs. I was looking down slightly. The top step came into view. It was dark, but nothing like pitch black, and there on top of the steps were legs, a black suit trouser, and a pair of polished black shoes. I tried with all my might to look up, but I just couldn't do it, and I went back down the stairs. One night it was Chris's birthday. He had a big party, loads of people, and the house was packed, blaring music, and at about 3 a.m, Chris takes me up to his room window. "Listen," he says. I run downstairs, grab my mate. He shuts off the music and everyone can hear it. Screams. 50-odd teenagers standing in the backyard and hanging out of a window in pure silence. I swear to you, I will not exaggerate. These were the most blood-curdling screams I've ever heard. It sounded like a woman or child, and it was coming from the forest. I tell myself it was probably a fox, but whatever was happening to that thing, I would not wish on anyone. It was crying in pain and it was loud. The sound would become higher pitched and pop, and then gurgling and then start all over again. Every single one of us stood there for about an hour. Girls started crying. Some of the guys were freaking out, and there was nothing else to do. We couldn't just keep partying with that going on. The sound was absolute suffering. Maybe you guys in the States have heard of things like that, with big predators over there. But the biggest predators we have here are foxes. And there was no commotion or barking or shouting, just the sound of this poor thing screaming and gurgling over and over like it was on a megaphone. In all my years of camping in Scotland, I've never heard anything like that. However, the woods were beautiful in the daytime. We would walk through them often. Every time without fail when we went through the woods during the day, high above us 2 crows would be flying in the sky, cawing and knocking each other. But there was some other strange stuff in there. There was an area with wooden joists that had been merged into a tree, like they had grown out of it. They had nails protruding over them and stained with viscous black liquid. Near there, where the branches from the tree separate, that were perfectly twisted together. Strange symbols carved into a tree. Once we found large piles of white hair at the base of these trees, a ring of a baby oak tree that had been cut down. The stump in the center seemed to be bloodstained. There was an area where many tall tree saplings had been bent over and secured to make arches tall enough for a man to walk through. We had the place mapped out well in our heads. We knew where to go from each landmark to find the others. The area was segmented by roads too, but at night, even if we followed the compass to a T, nothing was in the right place. Fair enough, it's dark, you can get turned around, but what really gives me the creeps is that at night, and only at night, about 15 feet northeast from the ring of the tree stumps was a huge U-shaped hedge about 15 feet high. The U-shaped hedge created a corridor about 30 feet long with a dead end. It was monolithic, but we could only ever find it at night. Chris had a small den that he built when he was a kid. We hung out there a few hours one day, just chatting and stuff, and then went back. The next day we returned to the den, and there was a perfect 3-foot wide black circle enscorched in the grass around the den. It was summer. The grass was tall, thick, and dry. I don't know how someone managed to do that. I think our constant investigating was annoying someone. We took it as a warning, but we didn't stop. After that, we weren't going so much, and in smaller groups, but I don't remember much else happening after that. This next story is from one of Chris's other group of friends that I heard before going to his house. So Chris had another group of friends who refused to go back to the house. Me and my best buddy knew one of them well, Darren. He was a really happy-go-lucky, really funny and cared about people An honestly great guy. They had similar experiences as we did, except these two. Not sure what order they happened in, so I'll start with what happened to Darren. We had been told that Darren would not talk about this. He would not say a word about it, having heard the story. I get that. So me and my buddy sat there with Darren in a pub in Glasgow city centre. It was a chance meeting, but since he'd had a few drinks I thought it would be worth asking. I said, "Dude, Crystal's house, what happened?" He stiffened up and I said, "I heard you won't talk about it. Can you just confirm what we've heard, even if it's just with a nod?" He nodded and confirmed the whole story that way, and I'll just tell you as I've been told it. He was sitting in the conservatory. It was a nice day, bright and sunny, and Darren was sitting alone. He had his headphones on listening to music when something caught his eye from his peripheral vision. He turned to look. Standing at the conservatory door was a woman draped in a black robe. She had long, straight blonde hair. Her eyes were wide and she was staring right at him. She brought her hand up and started tapping the glass frantically with her fingernail, all the time staring wide-eyed right at him. Darren freaked, got up from the couch, looked back, and the woman had moved back, but in the same position, still staring, but now just tapping at the air. He moved to the end of the couch, looked back, and she was further back, doing the same thing. He got to the kitchen door. She's back further, doing the same thing. He ran into the house, one last look back, and she's still on the other side of the fence. Still staring, still pointing. Darren didn't stop running. He ran upstairs into the bathroom, lifted the toilet seat and started smacking it on his head. His friends heard and pulled him away and calmed him down. After he confirmed a bit about the toilet, I asked him why. He said he just didn't know. One day they all decided to trek down into the woods. I think the group was about 8 strong, if not 7. Maybe one stayed behind. Anyway, Adam waited about 5 minutes after the rest set off because he wanted to freak them out. Adam had army experience. He was tall, 6'5". I knew him pretty well. He was cocky, funny, and confident. He told Crystal what he was doing and set off. About 2 hours went by and the rest of the group came back. Crystal asked, "Where's Adam?" You guys guess what happened next. They all went back in search of Adam. It was getting dark. They split up but stayed in earshot of each other. As they tell it, they searched for hours in the night. They met the edge of the woods, very upset at this point, losing hope. One of them shouted, "For God's sake, if you're there, make a noise. Do something." Right there and then, they hear a thump. They follow the sound, and only about 5 feet away, there he is, on the ground, leaning against a log, groggy. They grab him up, drag him back to the house all the way, and he's just slurring, "Witches, they got me, they got me." He had blood and a wound directly on top of his head. Blood was covering his face. He was close to delirious, so what they managed to get out of him was this. He ran down after them. He used his army training to sneak up on them. He was watching them from behind a tree. Then wham! He's on the ground leaning against a log. 3 women in white robes with blonde hair are staring in front of him. They tell him he shouldn't be there, and if he keeps coming it will be dangerous. The next thing he knows, his friends are shouting, asking him to make a noise. He groggily grabs a branch and starts hitting the log he's leaning on. He swears he follows them quite far into the woods, and the fact they found him where they did makes no sense. I spoke to him a lot about this. He was the most willing to talk and strangely the least bothered about the whole thing. He was also the only one in that group who wanted to go back, but that seemed to be the last straw for the rest of them. This is one more thing I almost forgot that Chris told me about. Him and a mutual friend called Taryn went into the woods one day. They went to the den. They said it was a nice day until they started to head back. They heard a whistling noise. It got louder and louder, and they walked and walked until they were sure they'd left the woods. Then they began to panic. They started to run. The whistling started coming from in front of them, and they changed direction and ran. Taryn said the woods became a blur. They ran another way, and no matter which way they ran, the whistling was in front of them. Eventually, on the point of exhaustion, they fell out of the woods onto the road that led home. Taryn said it was the scariest experience of his life. He felt like they would never escape, and said he kept trying to slow down and be calm, but he just knew they had to run. I was fortunate enough to grow up on a lovely little secluded piece of land in Canada. I had a large house which was backed by beautiful forests and woodland. I never wanted much in the way of entertainment, as myself and my brother Gabriel had plenty of games to play in the dense forest, which kept us busy for most of the day. I was homeschooled and spent a lot of my time in and around that forest, and grew to love it and know it like the back of my hand. My family is not very spiritual. My dad was an atheist, my mother a very casual Catholic. I think I might have gone into church twice in my life. Despite this, Dad didn't like us going deep into the forest. Mum, much the same. They said it had funny vibes, some gun instinct, I guess. They didn't have a problem with me and Gabe going into the forest, as long as we were sensible, were together, and did not go in too deep. We had enough of a feel for what was too deep to never cause a problem by venturing too far and getting lost or anything. But we would often still push into the woods a bit to explore new areas. There were some nights where I would be woken up by blue flashes coming through my window, as if someone taped cellophane over a flashlight and was sporadically turning it off and on from above the canopy deep in the woods. Other nights, if the wind carried just right, you could hear voices in the dead of night. Sometimes conversations, sometimes wailing or shouting. Other times, whispers, sometimes all three. I could never really hear what was being said. The woods stretched out for kilometers, and to my knowledge was uninhabited, where the lights and noises came from. On one particular occasion, the activity climaxed. I was about 14. Me and Gabe wandered further than we ever had. We reached a point, and it was like something snapped. It was hard to describe. It was like the feeling you get when you break something, and you know you're about to get caught. We turned back pretty quickly. I think something followed us out of the woods. A few hours later, I was reading in the living room, which had a big glass sliding door that faced the backyard and trees. That is when I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. A humanoid dude, probably 6 feet tall, was beckoning me from the tree line. He had wild, untamed hair, sickly, hairless skin, and didn't appear clothed. He just kept on beckoning, with this awkward, stiff movement of his arm. There was something totally off about him. I screeched for my dad, and when I did, the guy walked behind the nearest tree and vanished out of sight. I explained to my dad what I saw and looked outside, but found nothing. He told me I probably imagined something from my book. I know I definitely did not. This happened to me and my 2 friends when I was 14. When I was a young kid, I was very rebellious, and also the only child. I lived with my mom and my stepdad. My mom worked long hours, and so did my stepdad, who used to leave for work every day at 5 a.m. My mum worked 6 to 7 hours at a care home for the elderly. After school, me and my 2 best friends loved going to the park opposite my flat, where we'd talk, run around, play truth or dare, just girly things. One thing about this park was that it had a forest just at the end, which was rumoured to be haunted. We didn't believe in such things yet, but they excited us. Once we got very close to it and saw a few things, such as a mattress, blanket, toilet paper and some food. To me, it looked like a homeless person may have found shelter there, so I didn't look into it too much, but the boys at school said that there were devil worshippers. Again, we found this to be absurd and continued going to the park. One day it was dark around 8 p.m. and we were still there. We were playing around on the swings when suddenly I realized my phone was missing from my pocket. This was extremely weird, as I'd always kept a good eye on my phone because my parents would be pissed if I ever lost it. I told my friends that it was gone, and we began looking everywhere for this phone. Around the playground where it had to be, because we'd walked straight through the metal gate. It wasn't there. I panicked hard, more and more, and we began searching further away. We were now by the lake looking for my phone when Ali said, "I found it." I looked to where she was pointing to, and to my relief I saw my phone and couldn't be more thrilled. But what happened next made me sick. Next to my phone was a heart and some kind of organ. It looked like an intestine. The heart had a hole through it, which I noticed right away and pointed out. We were shocked and confused and honestly scared. After my friend Ali took a video with her phone, we then went to walk my friend Jamie to the bus stop and go home when we noticed a bright light shining from the forest. Now, the right decision would be to keep going and turn back, but we were 14 and a bit stupid, so decided to investigate, as we wanted to get to the bottom of where the guts came from. All three of us walked towards it, giggling and laughing, thinking it was a joke, until we got closer still. It was too close, and we could see something in the darkness. It appeared to be a man, but could have been a woman. It was hard to say, and they had a stick sticking out from the back. As soon as we saw it, we quickly began to run back into the main road, as this was no longer funny. Whoever was towards us did not have good intentions. While we ran, my friend Ali fell over. I quickly grabbed her and pulled her up as we continued running. We successfully made it onto the same road. Once we did, we looked back to see the person retreating back into the forest. Fair to say, we were shaken up. We never went back to that park again. I'm now 20 years old and still cannot understand what happened that night, or what could have happened. We had nightmares for a while after this event, and we never spoke of it again. Just this weekend, my cousins from the city in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, visited me and my family down here in southern Pennsylvania near Maryland. We live in the boondocks, and there are many trails for people who enjoy horseback riding and taking rides on ATVs. When my cousins got to my house, we decided to go exploring towards my neighbor's house, who lived isolated in the middle of the woods in a log cabin. We walked a trail the whole way up, for about a mile, joking all the way. Now let me give you a bit of backstory about the place. Back in the 1800s, there was a bar and a few small cabins for people to stay in. A group of men got drunk and attempted to shoot bottles off each other's heads. People died, and the wives of the men who died burned down the bar and the cabins. Then they were later hanged by the bar owners of the family of the people who passed. This happened right below where we were exploring. Legend says that the women and people who passed away here in the fires still lurk around the forests. Another incident takes place in the 80s or 90s. A teen was driving really fast with his friends at the exact same location as where the bar incident took place. The teen crashed into a tree, beheading his friend and leaving him alive. He was tried for manslaughter as he was driving drunk. This place is destined for bad omens. So we were exploring the trail approaching the house. As we approached the house, we heard a very distinct whistle, but thought nothing of it, as it was spring, it was warm, and there were birds around. But when we stopped to take a break, we heard twigs snap. We all froze as a giant branch fell, and then a whole tree. It was a dead tree that probably would have been easy to push down. We looked behind it and saw a humanoid figure. As it set in with my brain, I realized it was a man, ripped with ragged overalls that had no more color and a worn-out, no-colored, plaid flannel. He looked no older than 40. He looked at us for a while and then ran at us with a bat-like stick while laughing like a maniac. We ran to the other side, where we were cut off by an electric fence. We then turned the other way. By this time we were way off trail in the middle of the woods, but I knew that all I had to do was go down back on the trail. By the time we got back on the trail, we lost him. I tell you, I'm never going back there again. I'm from Trinidad and Tobago, located in the Caribbean. According to our folklore, Doden is the spirit of a child who passed away before baptism. They have no faces except an O-shaped mouth, feet turned backwards, and a large hat. They usually lure children into the woods to make them lost and to pass from this world like they did. They also tend to be present at rivers and bamboo patches. Growing up, my grandparents and elder relatives would always warn me about them, considering I live near a forested area and there's a river right behind my house. They'd usually say if Duans heard someone call your name, they can take on the voice of those persons and use it to lure you in. I usually ignored their warnings and would play close to the river by myself because I was an only child back then. One evening when I was about 10, I was in my hammock in the patio. I had a clear view of the river and a bamboo patch from where I was. It was around 4 p.m. and I realized the atmosphere suddenly turned eerie. The wind stopped blowing. The trees were still and not a sound could be heard from any animals. The street I live in became too quiet. It was almost as if it were frozen in time. While rocking in the hammock, I heard my mum suddenly call my name. It was as if she was shouting, and she kept calling me for 2 minutes straight until I looked back and shouted, "All right, I'm coming." Now this is where it gets weird. All the time she was calling, it was coming in the direction of the bamboo patch from across the river. I was confused as to why my mum would be there, but my gut told me to check inside the house first. Walking through the house, I could still hear her calling me until I reached the back room and found my mum doing laundry. I asked her if she was calling me, and she said she'd never called me. I looked out the back door, and the calling stopped. I asked my mum if she heard someone calling my name, and she said she heard nothing. Since then, I stopped playing outside, and I never heard my name called again. I'm a teen that has a strange hobby. I raise, breed, and sell rabbits. A layout of what I call the bunny barn. You walk in, and all 4 walls have cages lining them. 2 walls have windows looking out onto the fields, which we grow a tall grass that's normally around 8 foot in height. Anyway, we live on the edge of a forest, and sometimes we'll see deer and elk, maybe a coyote or wolf, but most of the time they stick to their forest. But while I was unloading the truck of rabbit feed, I noticed that some of the bags, when I came back, had little puncture marks on them. I tried to rationalize this as maybe mice chewing holes in the bag, but something felt off. I then continued to have strange encounters with a dark figure that I will see watching me, but not harm me, although I've never felt scared or that I'm in danger. But when I started losing 10 bags of rabbit food weighing 50 pounds each, they all disappeared after I'd made sure they were locked away and secure so that mice and wild animals wouldn't be able to get to them. Then I lost around $200 a week, due to what I'm guessing has to be the figure. But recently the figure has been appearing closer to around my house more often. One time, even the bunny barn. I've started to get nervous and scared when I see it. It's everywhere now, and I can't escape it. I thought maybe when deer season comes around I can leave this area and do some hunting alone. I was sitting in my stand alone 4 hours away from the house. I then heard some footsteps and drew back my bow in case it's a buck about to step forward and give me a clean shot. But it was the black figure. I expected him to stop, but he got closer and closer. He was at the base of my tree. He grabbed the ladder and began to climb. I started screaming and yelling for him to stop, eventually knocking an arrow and shooting it at him. It went straight through him and he didn't stop. I accepted fate. But once he got to me, I closed my eyes and prayed. But he dropped my arrow that I had clearly seen pass through him and hit the ground with a solid thud. He never went back down to grab it. It's been a while since I've seen him. I stopped losing rabbit food, but I recently had a large setback that I believe to be him. There was no way that I lost 20 of my 24 rabbits all in one night. All perished without a single mark on them. This happened a long time ago. I was 12 and in my grandparents' village. We had a cow and an ox. Usually the son of the bull, usually about 1, took all the cattle to graze, and at night he would take them back. Cows know where to go when going home. My grandpa had a male ox since my father was an adult, and he wasn't there. I took the responsibility. Basically, my job was to go around the village with the ox trailing after me, calling the people to open their doors. Our ox would grunt to call the herd and all the females came out. From then on I had to take them to do a clearing up the mountain and then later take them to the river. It was easy. The animals already knew where they were going. They were calm and our bull was a gentle giant. All I did was ride him and have thin ropes on his horns. If any of the females wandered off, I would call them and on rare occasions poke them with a dull stick in the right direction. My grandpa said, if I see a very old boar or a fox, I should stay on the ox. Animals dare not go near an ox herd. There's a dark part of the forest where it's very quiet and even the bravest hunters will not venture. It's very slippery and dangerous. They say that even the deer and boar dare not go there. I was forbidden to go there and honestly never wanted to go. It was an early morning and everything seemed fine. I was on the ox going up the mountain and I was glad he let me on him because it was a hard trek up. I saw one of the females was wandering off. I followed her and left our ox and the dog to guide the herd. She went into the forest. I ran to her and got on tying the rope to her horns. I tried steering her away, but she continued. She went into the dark part and stopped. I didn't want to get off in case she ran back and left me there. I heard a crunch and turned. A very old man was walking towards us. He looked frail with dirty clothes and a long beard. I was scared, so I laid on the ox, clinging to her, not wanting to fall if she ran. Oxen aren't like bulls. They don't jump up and kick when scared. They either attack with their horns or trample or run. I was ready to hold on no matter what she chose. Our oxen don't take kindly to strangers before I took them out, and I had to go to every house to have the ox owner introduce me to their animal. That way they saw that their owners trusted me with their herd leader, our ox. I knew she would either attack or bolt, but she just stood there. The stranger came up to us, petted her on the head, whispered something I didn't understand, and he looked at me. His eyes were completely white, and then he turned and vanished into the trees. Suddenly the female grunted, as if she'd just woken up, and bolted the way we came. We found the herd and I quickly got on our ox and yelled, "Water." He knew that command and went down towards the river, where the houses were, as it was closer to home. I barged into one of the houses to try to explain. The couple there stayed with me and sent their daughter to call my grandpa. I couldn't sleep for days, remembering those white eyes. My grandparents didn't let me out of the house or garden, and I wasn't allowed near the trees. Later I learned they were protecting me from a lensig, a forest spirit which can take the form of a man, owl or wolf. It hates when people go into its part of the woods and can take you. I later learned that the ox that took me there had fallen ill and passed away. It sometimes stayed in the trees as an owl, watching for the offender. For years when I went with my grandparents, they wouldn't let me be alone. Not just outside, but inside too. I'm never going into those woods again. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. Really enjoyed tonight's stories. Haunted woods are creepy indeed. Some of the stuff that happens in them, jeez. I hope that you liked the stories too. As always, a huge thanks to my wonderful patrons for your continued help and support. If you'd like to help support the channel, you can do so by clicking the link to Patreon, and you can sign up, and for some exclusive content here and there, you get some and prizes. I get a little bit of money. So think about it if you want to do that. Thanks, guys. Oh, and your name on the credits in every episode. I guess that's a perk too. If you like what you saw, you can subscribe for more and maybe watch another video, or one of like the over 1,000 that we've got now. But yeah, for now, guys, I'm going to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.